Have you ever wondered why Africa, a continent bursting with natural resources, has struggled with poverty for so long? What if I told you it wasn't by accident?
What if it was by design? Today, we are going to peel back the layers of history and uncover a story that has been deliberately buried, the story of how powerful empires built their unimaginable wealth on the back of broken African kingdoms. This isn't just about the past. It's about understanding the world we live in today.
Let's start by dispelling a myth.
The story often told is that Europe brought civilization to a dark and primitive continent. But before the first European ships ever reached its shores, Africa was home to vibrant, complex, and wealthy civilizations. Think of the Mali Empire, led by Mansa Musa, whose wealth was so legendary it destabilized economies on his pilgrimage to Mecca.
Or the Kingdom of Congo with its sophisticated political structure and extensive trade networks. These were not backward societies.
They were centers of art, science, and commerce.
So, what changed? The arrival of European powers in the 15th and 16th centuries marked a devastating turning point.
Initially, it was trade, but this trade quickly shifted to the most brutal and dehumanizing enterprise in human history, the transatlantic slave trade.
Over centuries, an estimated 12 to 15 million Africans were forcibly captured, chained, and shipped across the Atlantic in horrific conditions.
They were treated not as human beings, but as commodities cargo to be bought and sold.
This wasn't just a random act of cruelty. It was a calculated economic system.
The labor of enslaved Africans built the fortunes of the Americas and Europe.
They toiled on sugar plantations in the Caribbean, cotton fields in the United States, and mines in South America.
The profits from this unpaid labor fueled the Industrial Revolution in Europe, funding the very banks, factories, and cities that define the modern Western world.
While Europe's wealth soared, Africa was being systematically drained of its most valuable resource, its people.
Generations were lost, communities were shattered, and the social fabric of entire regions was torn apart.
The end of the slave trade in the 19th century didn't bring freedom.
It brought a new form of domination. This was the scramble for Africa in 1884 at the Berlin Conference. European leaders gathered with a map and a ruler, carving up the continent among themselves without any regard for the people who lived there. They drew arbitrary lines, lumping rival ethnic groups together and splitting unified kingdoms apart. This wasn't a mistake.
It was a strategy.
It was the classic tactic of divide and rule. By pitting different groups against each other, colonial powers could maintain control with minimal effort.
They would arm one group and encourage it to dominate another, creating cycles of conflict and resentment that, in many places, continue to this day. Suddenly, the ancient kingdoms of Africa were gone, replaced by colonies with names like French West Africa, British East Africa, and the Belgian Congo.
With political control established, the second phase of mass exploitation began, the plunder of natural resources.
Africa was, and still is, incredibly rich in diamonds, gold, rubber, copper, and countless other valuable materials.
Under colonial rule, this wealth was not used to benefit the African people. It was extracted and shipped directly to Europe to fuel its industries. Let's take the Belgian Congo as a horrifying example. Under the personal rule of King Leopold II, the Congolese people were forced into brutal labor to harvest rubber.
The cruelty was unimaginable.
Those who failed to meet their impossible quotas had their hands cut off. Millions died from violence, starvation, and disease.
All this suffering was to supply the booming market for rubber in Europe and America for things like bicycle and automobile tires.
The Congo's wealth made Leopold one of the richest men in the world, while its people were subjected to a genocide. This pattern was repeated across the continent.
In South Africa, vast diamond and gold mines were built on the backs of exploited African laborers, with the profits flowing to European investors.
In West Africa, fertile lands were converted to cash crop plantations for cocoa and palm oil, displacing local food production and creating dependency on imported goods.
The infrastructure built during this time, like railways and ports, wasn't designed to connect African communities or build a local economy.
It was designed for one purpose only: to get resources out of Africa and onto ships bound for Europe as efficiently as possible. This leads us to the core of the issue.
Africa is not underdeveloped. It was deliberately and systematically underdeveloped.
The economic structures put in place during colonialism were designed to create dependency, not prosperity.
African economies were rewired to serve Europe.
They were forced to export raw materials at low prices and import expensive manufactured goods from their colonizers.
This unequal relationship trapped them in a cycle of poverty and debt.
When African nations finally began to gain their independence in the mid-20th century, they were not starting on a level playing field.
They inherited nations with fractured societies, artificial borders, and economies built for extraction, not for the well-being of their own citizens. They were left with a legacy of exploitation that would take generations to overcome. Even after independence, the old colonial powers and new global players have often continued to exert economic and political influence, a phenomenon known as neocolonialism. So when we look at the world map today and see the stark contrast in wealth between the global north and the global south, it's crucial to understand that this is not a natural state of affairs. It is the direct result of a history of exploitation. The wealth of many developed nations is inextricably linked to the wealth that was stolen from continents like Africa.
Understanding this history is not about assigning blame or dwelling on the past. It's about seeking truth and justice. It's about recognizing the deep-seated global inequalities and working to build a fairer, more equitable world. It is about changing the narrative from one of African poverty to one of stolen African wealth. The story of Africa is not one of failure, but one of immense resilience in the face of centuries of oppression.
It's a story that is still being written, and it's a story we all need to understand.
Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into a crucial part of our shared world history.
If you found this video insightful and want to explore more hidden stories that shape our world, please make sure to hit that subscribe button.
And don't forget to ring the notification bell, so you'll be the first to know when our next video drops. We have so much more to uncover together. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.